The Gaza Health Ministry has shared heartbreaking new figures, revealing the unimaginable toll of the ongoing war. Since the war began on October 7th, more than 46,319 Palestinians have been killed, including over 16,492 children. These are not just numbers, they are lives, families, and futures lost, highlighting the immense suffering endured by Gaza's civilian population. The injuries are equally staggering, with more than 114,540 people wounded, many of them women and children. These figures reflect the relentless and devastating impact of the war, as Gaza's already vulnerable population continues to bear the brunt of the violence. Israeli officials have revised the death toll from the October 7th, reducing it from 1,405 to 1,139. The devastation in Gaza is nothing short of catastrophic. Entire communities are being destroyed, lives shattered, and families left with nothing but unimaginable grief. This ongoing tragedy serves as a stark reminder of the urgent need to protect innocent lives and find a path towards justice and peace for the Palestinian people. Adding to this suffering, the harsh winter weather has brought another wave of misery for displaced families in Gaza. In Deir al-Balah, dozens of tents, many already weakened from months of use, have been blown away or flooded by rain and wind. Families are now struggling to repair what little shelter they have. One displaced Gazan, Abu Ahmed Hussein, described waking at 3 a.m. to salvage what was left of his family's tent after water poured in. Another, Sabrine Abu Shanab, a mother of 3, spoke of her children's soaked clothing and the health challenges she faces in the cold with inadequate supplies.
بسبب المنخفض القوي اللي حصل امبارح، خيام المهترئة جمعت عليها المياه، كسرتها وكسرت الخشب، والمي نزلت على اليمين، وقمنا في الساعة 3 الفجر واحنا بنرتب امورنا ونحاول نلملم ما تبقى من الخيمة. وهي حالنا.
مطرة الدنيا هي مطرة مش كثيرة كمان، مطرة خفيفة، شوف ايش عملت فينا، غرقنا، الخشب تاع الخيمة تكسر، شبصناها ب100 عافية. المية خشت علينا من جوا على حرامات اولادي وعلى اواعيهم، الاولاد كلهم غيرت لهم من الصبح لنفلينا من كتر ما هم نايمين والمطر مغرقهم لنفلينا، والله العظيم من البنطلون لنفلينا، واحنا نشلح والحرامات مليانه والمخدات وكله. شردنا من قصف اليهود، اجينا للشتاء والمطر والسيول والفيضانات اللي تحتينا في الخيام، ولا حد سائل فينا ولا مسؤول سائل فينا ولا اي حد سائل فينا. نقول يا رب بس. هي أزمة صدري، أنا بيجي لها شهر ما هي على بخاخة البنتولين، مش راضية أطيب بالمرة أنا، بالبرد والشتاء والسقعة قلة الحرامات والأواعي والخيمة المش صالحة للشتاء أصلاً على الفاضي.
Asma Al-Assad, the wife of former Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, has been barred from entering the United Kingdom due to her perceived role in supporting and enabling the Assad regime during Syria's devastating civil war. Asma, who was born and raised in London and held British citizenship, has been stripped of the right to return to her country of birth, marking a significant move by the UK government. Once viewed as a progressive figure with a Western upbringing, Asma al-Assad's public support for her husband's brutal regime drew intense criticism. Throughout Syria's civil war, she was seen in propaganda campaigns praising the regime's brutal military efforts, even as they were accused of widespread human rights abuses, including the bombing of civilians and the use of chemical weapons. The UK government imposed sanctions on Asma in 2021, freezing her assets and barring her entry into Britain. Officials argued that her actions were far from neutral, portraying her as complicit in perpetuating the violence and repression inflicted on the Syrian people. These sanctions aligned with broader international efforts to hold the Assad regime and its close associates accountable for crimes against humanity. For Syrians and the global Muslim community, this decision has been seen as a small but important step toward justice. The Syrian conflict has caused immense suffering, displacing millions, killing hundreds of thousands and leaving the nation in ruins. By barring Asma Al-Assad, the UK sends a powerful message rejecting any legitimacy of the Assad regime and reinforcing the need for accountability for those involved in such atrocities. While this action may not directly ease the hardships faced by Syrians, it underscores the importance of justice and vigilance in addressing human rights abuses. The international community remains focused on finding ways to rebuild Syria and support its victims, standing in solidarity with those who continue to endure the lasting impacts of this devastating conflict. Syria is looking to build strategic partnerships with Ukraine across political, economic, social, and scientific sectors. This was announced by Syria's new Foreign Minister, Assad Hassan al-Shibani, during a meeting in Damascus with Ukrainian Deputy Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha. The move comes as Kyiv strengthens ties with Syria's new leadership following the ousting of former President Bashar al-Assad. Al-Shibani highlighted the shared experiences of both nations, drawing a parallel between Syria's 14-year civil war and Ukraine's ongoing struggle against Russian aggression. He described both peoples as having endured immense suffering, but emphasized the potential for cooperation in rebuilding and recovery. Ukraine has already begun providing direct humanitarian support to Syria. Andriy Sybiha confirmed the delivery of 20 shipments of flour as part of Ukraine's Grain from Ukraine initiative, which is being carried out in partnership with the UN World Food Programme. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky recently announced the dispatch of 500 metric tons of wheat flour to Syria, marking the first batch of aid under this program. This growing partnership between Syria and Ukraine comes amid a decline in Russian influence in Syria. For years, Russia was a key ally of Bashar al-Assad, supplying food and logistical support while maintaining critical military bases in the country. However, the ousting of Assad has created uncertainty regarding Russia's future role in Syria. Wheat supplies from Russia have been suspended due to payment delays and concerns about the new leadership in Damascus. The status of Russia's military bases, including the Hmeimim Air Base and the Tartus naval facility, is now under negotiation with Syria's new rulers. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov confirmed ongoing discussions regarding these facilities. Despite this, Syria's de facto leader, Ahmed al-Sharaa, has expressed a desire to maintain cooperative relations with Russia, emphasizing shared strategic interest without elaborating on specific details. As Syria embarks on a new chapter under its Islamist leadership, the growing partnership with Ukraine marks a significant shift in regional dynamics. Both nations appear committed to building resilience and cooperation after years of conflict, signaling new opportunities for mutual recovery and progress.
Holding elections in Syria could take several years, the country's de facto leader Ahmed al-Sharaa has said in his first comments on a possible electoral timetable since Bashar al-Assad was ousted early in December. In an interview with the Saudi state-owned broadcaster Al Arabiya, broadcast on Sunday, Sharaa said it would take about a year for Syrians to see drastic changes after the fall of Assad family rule and the end of 13 years of civil war.
Election infrastructure in Syria at this time is ailing. It needs rebuilding. Today we are talking about the displacement of more than 15 million people from Syria, between displaced and refugees. Most do not have a fixed registration. No one knows what the population of Syria is today. Drafting a new constitution or making amendments will take experts a long time, maybe 2 or 3 years, God knows.
Sharaa leads the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham group that toppled Assad. It was once affiliated with Islamic State and Al-Qaeda, but has since renounced both. And the new government has sought to reassure Syrians and neighbouring countries that it has left militancy behind. Still, it remains unclear whether it will impose strict Islamic rule or move towards democracy. Sharaa said HTS, formerly known as the Nusra Front, would be dissolved at a national dialogue conference.
A country cannot be run with the mentality of groups and factions. Since we were in Idlib, we've been ready for this, psychologically and morally.
Shara and other officials have repeatedly vowed to protect Syria's many minority groups.
We will build a state, not export revolution. I've said we want to manage this phase with the state mentality, not a revolutionary one.
While Western and regional powers welcomed the fall of Assad, it has raised questions about the future of a multi-ethnic country where foreign states including Turkey and Russia have strong and potentially competing interests.
The BBC is under scrutiny following a detailed investigation led by British journalist Owen Jones, which sheds light on alleged bias in its coverage of Israel's ongoing actions in Gaza. The investigation, published by Dropsite News, is based on interviews with 13 current and former BBC staff members who have accused the organisation of presenting a narrative that disproportionately favours Israel while underreporting Palestinian suffering. The staff members describe systemic bias in the BBC's editorial approach, highlighting language choices and reporting frameworks that they argue diminish the severity of Israel's actions. For example, while Hamas is routinely referred to with terms like terrorists, Israeli military actions resulting in mass Palestinian casualties are framed with softer language or attributed to unverified sources. This alleged bias has caused frustration among journalists within the organisation, with over 100 BBC staffers signing a letter demanding reforms to uphold fairness and impartiality. One focal point of the investigation is the role of Rafi Berg, the Middle East online editor, who has been accused by colleagues of shaping coverage to downplay criticism of Israel. Journalists allege that their internal complaints about the bias have been dismissed by BBC leadership, further exacerbating frustrations. An example cited is the BBC's treatment of Amnesty International's report accusing Israel of committing genocide in Gaza, which received minimal and delayed coverage across the broadcaster's most prominent platforms. The investigation also highlights instances where the BBC allegedly avoided directly identifying Israeli actions as the cause of Palestinian suffering. For example, headlines and reporting often use vague language, such as violence broke out, rather than explicitly naming Israeli forces as perpetrators. Journalists within the BBC have expressed outrage at these practices, pointing to their effect on public understanding of the conflict. The investigation goes on to critique the influence of key figures within the BBC and explores the broader structural and cultural issues contributing to the alleged imbalance. Despite the claims made by staff and the evidence presented in the investigation, the BBC has defended its coverage. A spokesperson stated that the organisation stands by its editorial decisions and remains committed to impartiality. This investigation underscores the challenges faced by major news organisations in reporting on highly polarised conflicts and raises important questions about the responsibilities of media outlets in representing all sides fairly. For many within the BBC and the wider Muslim community, it also highlights the urgent need for accountability and reform in the face of accusations of systemic bias.
I want to explain how this piece came about. I was first contacted by a BBC journalist about the killing of Mohammed Bahar in July. He was a 24-year-old Palestinian man with Down syndrome and autism. He needed round-the-clock care from his family. He was terrified and traumatised by an Israeli onslaught he didn't understand. On the 3rd of July, the Israeli military raided his home, and as the family begged for mercy, the Israeli army set their dog on this 24-year-old man with Down syndrome and autism as he begged for it to stop. This injured young man was put in a separate room and locked away while the family were driven away at gunpoint. They eventually returned. A week later, they found his decomposing body. Now, in the Middle East Eye correctly headlined this: Palestinian with Down syndrome left to die by Israeli soldiers after combat dog attack. The Independent covered it with Gaza man with Down syndrome mauled by Israeli attack dog and left to die, family says. The BBC's original headline: the lonely death of Gaza man with Down syndrome.
In response to this investigation, the BBC said this: "We reject your attack on an individual member of staff. Like every journalist at the BBC, they must adhere to the BBC's editorial guidelines, which ensure that we report impartially and without fear or favour. The allegations you've made fundamentally misdescribe this person's role and misunderstand the way the BBC works. More broadly, we reject any suggestion of a lenient stance towards either side in this conflict. The Israel-Gaza conflict is a challenging and polarizing subject to cover, but when asked to choose the one provider they would turn to for impartial reporting on this story, 3 times as many picked the BBC as choose our closest competitor. The BBC remains the world's most trusted international news source. We have transparently set out our approach to reporting the conflict, for example in this blog from Deborah Turnis, and if we make mistakes we correct them. Our coverage should be judged on its own merits and in its entirety. Former US President Jimmy Carter has passed away at the age of 100, serving as the 39th President of the United States from 1977 to 1981. Carter led the country through a period marked by both domestic and international challenges, including economic difficulties and the Iran hostage crisis. After leaving office, Carter remained a prominent global figure. He devoted much of his life to humanitarian causes, focusing on human rights, election monitoring, and efforts to eradicate diseases through his work with the Carter Center. His dedication to peace and diplomacy earned him the Nobel Peace Prize in 2002. Carter's passing marks the end of a long and impactful life in public service, leaving behind a legacy that will continue to be reflected upon by many. As the longest-living US president, his contributions to politics and humanitarian efforts remain a significant part of his story.
This is the moment an Israeli airstrike hit a tower at Yemen's Sana'a airport on Thursday. Reuters verified the date by aftermath footage and reports of the strike, and was able to confirm the location as objects seen in videos matched file and satellite imagery of the area. The head of the World Health Organization, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, said he was at the airport when chaos struck. Surveillance footage broadcasted on a Yemen television channel showed a man, which it said was WHO Chief Tedros, seated in a lounge before being abruptly escorted.
I was not sure actually I could survive because it was so close, few meters from where we were.
Tedros spoke via telephone from Jordan on Friday, where he flew after the strike to help evacuate a United Nations colleague who was seriously injured at the airport.
You know, we didn't know actually what would happen, but after 4 explosions, I think it stopped. The bombing occurred alarmingly close to our location, just meters away, and to be honest, a slight deviation could have resulted in a direct hit.
Tedros traveled to Yemen over Christmas to try to negotiate the release of 16 UN staff and others held there. He acknowledged that the trip was risky in light of tensions between Israel and the Houthis. He said talks with Yemeni authorities had gone well and that he saw a chance that staff could be freed. Israel's military said it struck multiple targets linked to the Houthi movement on Thursday, after Houthis repeatedly fired drones and missiles toward Israel in what they describe as acts of solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said afterwards that Israel was just getting started with the Houthis.
After South Korea's deadliest ever air disaster, the country's acting president Choi Sang-mok ordered an emergency safety inspection of its entire airline operations system on Monday. That came as investigators worked to identify victims and find out what caused Sunday's Jeju Air plane crash, which claimed the lives of 175 passengers and 4 of the 6 crew on board. A large memorial was set up in a gym about 5 miles from the crash site at Muan, where people including Choi came to pay respects. Meanwhile, the Transport Ministry said it would inspect all Boeing 737-800 aircraft operated in South Korea and look closely into its maintenance management systems. Authorities have recovered the black box from the crashed Jeju Air jet and say the US National Transportation Safety Board will be joining in the investigation. The aircraft, which was coming in from Bangkok, had belly landed, skidded off the end of the runway, and smashed into a wall. A Transport Ministry official said Monday that Jeju Air pilot had declared Mayday and reported a bird strike. He added there wasn't time after the warning to prepare for what came next.
If there had been more time, they could have requested preparation measures, such as dispatching fire trucks to stand by and preparing for an emergency landing. Typically, in such cases, the pilot makes this request and the control tower coordinates by placing firefighting teams on standby.
The crash killed mostly local South Koreans who were returning from holidays in Thailand. However, 2 Thai nationals also died. They include Jongluk Dwamani. Her father Boon Choi spoke to local media Sunday and expressed his wish for his daughter to be brought home.
I can only accept it, make peace with it. When I think about it, I remind myself that it was an accident. It's something that can happen to anyone. So I've come to terms with it because no matter what I do, my daughter won't come back. I just hope the government can provide some help. I want to bring my daughter's body back home for a proper religious ceremony.
A series of copyright lawsuits could shape the future business of artificial intelligence. The cases are from authors, news outlets, visual artists, musicians, and other copyright owners. They accuse OpenAI, Anthropic, Meta Platforms, and other technology companies of using their work to train chatbots and other AI-based content generators without permission or payment. Courts will likely begin hearing arguments starting next year on whether the defendants' copying amounts to fair use. That could be the AI copyright war's defining legal question. Tech companies have argued that their AI systems make fair use of copyrighted material and that they study it to create new transformative content. Copyright owners, though, say the companies unlawfully copy their works to generate rival content that threatens their livelihoods. OpenAI, Meta, Silicon Valley investment firm Andreessen Horowitz warn that being forced to pay copyright holders for their content could cripple the burgeoning US AI industry. Some content owners began voluntary licensing their material to tech companies this year, including Reddit, News Corp, and the Financial Times. Reuters licensed its articles to Meta in October. AI companies could escape US copyright liability completely if the courts agree with them on the fair use question. Judges hearing the cases in different jurisdictions could also reach conflicting conclusions on fair use and other issues. Multiple rounds of appeals are likely. An ongoing dispute between Thomson Reuters and former legal research competitor Ross Intelligence could provide an early indication of how judges will treat fair use arguments. Thomson Reuters, the parent company of Reuters News, alleged that Ross misused copyrighted material from its legal research platform Westlaw, and that it used it to build an AI-powered legal search engine. Ross denied wrongdoing, invoking fair use. Another early fair use indicator could come in a dispute between music publishers and Anthropic. It's over the use of their song lyrics to train its chatbot Claude.